Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Governor. I really appreciate those remarks. Hope you all had a nice two breakout sessions and lunch, yes. I just want to say that this morning's speakers, I think, sort of laid the groundwork for what is happening at the intersection of mental health and the workplace, and provided kind of a comprehensive foundation for the next panel that I'm going to bring up, and hopefully we can take it kind of a step further from there. We know the issues, right? A lot of us in the room know the problems, but let's talk about solutions now and paths forward. Our next panel features leaders from Fortune 500 companies, disruptive tech giants, and the largest federation of unions in the United States. And we're not just going to talk about top-down leadership, we're discussing the importance of diversity and inclusion and the role that every one of us can play in creating workplaces that are safe, human-centered, productive for everyone, regardless of their lived experiences or their diagnoses. Please hold your applause until I introduce everyone, if you don't mind, and then we'll kick things right off. Richard Trumka is the president of the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, the AFL-CIO. Oh, can we wait till, we'll get everyone up and then we'll applaud. Go ahead. Nilka, that's your seat, yep, you're good. Nilka Thomas is the vice president of talent and inclusion at a company you probably know called Lyft. Nilka. Sonja Kellen is the director of global health and wellness benefits at Microsoft.
You sunk in there.
Unfortunately, your program says that John Stroup was going to be with us, president and CEO of Belden, but he had a flight issue and he's not going to be able to be here. So we're grateful instead to have Roger Crone, the CEO of Leidos, join our conversation. Thank you. Ooh, with a boot and everything, impressive.
We'll talk about that.
Okay. Did I say Leidos?
Yeah.
Which way?
The middle of the word kaleidoscope.
Leidos. I knew I was going to get
Think
it
about
wrong.
kaleidoscope.
Ah, yes. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, you're welcome.
Let me start, Mr. Trumka, let me start with you. Is that okay?
Sure.
Welcome. You run the AFL-CIO. People have probably heard of it. You've got 12 million members?
12 and a half.
12 and a half million members. In all seriousness, that's a lot of power. What do they want to see when it comes to employers and the provision of mental health benefits and access to benefits?
Well, first of all, we've been at this for about 20 years now. We go back and we set up an agency in Washington, D.C. that originally took care of just our staff members. And it took care of literally every facet of their life, not just behavioral health, but marital problems, legal problems, financial problems, and everything to help them.
So not the union members in the country, but the
just
organization.
the employees of the AFL-CIO. Yeah. And then we began talking to our members, and we began seeing that members were being abused. They would lose their jobs because of SUDS, substance use disorders, and mental health issues. And so we started negotiating contracts. But before we did that, we made our contracts actually work for workers, so that the contracts, the healthcare that we have, actually is the model healthcare system that we want our employers to have. We provide sick days so that people can receive treatment. They can go to counseling. They can do the things that they need to do. Our healthcare plans are on parity. Mental behavior or behavioral health is on parity with all the other health systems that we have. And then we've tried to be a model as a employer. We've tried to actually ferret out the systems that work and don't work, to eliminate phantom systems where they look good on paper, but they don't
They're
do
not
that.
real.
So for 20 years, we've been trying to do this, and I'd like to tell you that we have all the answers, but we do not. We're working hard every day. We look at every avenue we can. We thank the Kennedy Forum for all the leadership that they've provided and the guidance that they've given us. And our members simply want to have the treatment that they need, whether it's with behavioral health or it's any other health problem that they have.
And let me just follow up, because earlier in the panel this morning, I don't think you were here, but I mentioned the issue for employees, right? That even if there is mental health care provided, it's often expensive. It's often not fully covered by your insurance. Even if you have a great paying union job, you may not get it all covered. And particularly in urban areas like Chicago, it is expensive to go see a psychologist. How do you grapple with some of those issues for your membership?
Well, for our employees, we actually pay for it. That's part of the health care that we provide. And then we try to negotiate that into the contracts that we negotiate with our employers so that they can provide the proper health. It's a struggle because it is costly, but it is more costly not to do it because people lose jobs, they lose time, they lose the skills that you have developed in them, and ultimately cost the employer a whole lot more than going back, training people to recognize the symptoms, teaching people to communicate so they don't aggravate the symptoms, and then providing quick treatment when we recognize that there is a problem.
Nilka, I mentioned disruption. Lyft is certainly a company that is all about disrupting the marketplace. You've rolled out a new kind of innovative mental health program. Can you tell us about what that does for employees of Lyft and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I think about the work that needs to happen in organizations like Lyft and beyond, in some ways it's less about disruption and it's more about normalization. Like, how do we make this conversation a lot more accessible for everybody? I think the benefit of working at Lyft is we have a lot of millennials in our workforce.
Yeah.
And I think they come with expectations and demands that this is going to be a topic that employers are thinking about and are setting up their benefits, their cultures around. And so we have that push from the outside. But I think fundamentally, what's most important is that we have a culture that supports this. We have a leadership team that is committed and invested, and then we're making that investment in the actual benefits themselves. So last year, we launched a partnership with Lyra Health that provides behavioral therapy for all of our employees and their families for absolutely free. So we wanted to make this as frictionless as possible so that when people are having issues that they're contending with, whether it's inside the workplace or beyond, that we're providing that level of service and support for our workers. And I think, again, I'll reiterate this point around leadership. We have to not only make that benefit available, but how do we ensure that people, A, know that it's there, and B, know that it's okay to actually take advantage of it. So a big leverage point for us is through our managers. That day to day, they're interacting with our workforce in the field, they're on the ground, and they are set up to be able to really issue spot and point people in the direction of resources and do that in a way that's very encouraging and not stigmatized.
Is what you're doing in the ride share world, is it unique? I mean, I don't know if other companies are, why are you laughing?
Nothing is, I mean, it's all new in the right
It's all
world.
new, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I'm just laughing because, it's just how revolutionary, better utilization out of automobiles is, and, what a difference that has made in the whole ecosystem. And I was just thinking the parallelisms in healthcare.
And to that point, that maybe puts you in a position to be leaders in terms of this space. And as you said, a lot of your employees are younger people.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a human issue. It's also a talent and a retention issue. If we're not offering this level of support for employees, we're missing the boat, because there is a reality that employees today think of these as table stakes, right? And so if we want to be able to engage the most talented employee base, we're going to need to make sure that we're sending a signal that we're going to take care of you once you get here. So I think most of tech has caught on that this is kind of baseline expectation, and we're following suit. We're a much younger company than Mr. Trumka, and so we haven't been at it as long, but I think the commitment is there, and we're starting to show that investment early on.
Roger, blunt question. Are employers doing enough?
We're doing more than we ever have. And, I would tell you, whether it be traditional healthcare, addiction, alcoholism, diabetes, mental health, we always, every day, in our company, we primarily do what we do through people. We have 33,000 people. We do more solutions and services. And, every day we go home and say, have we done enough across the board? And we're just on a journey, and what I'm proud of is we're doing more today than we did a year ago. We're doing more a year ago than we did 5 or 10 years ago. I think when we ask our employees, there are a couple of fundamental things. First of all, they want us to think about their total wellness. And of course, we all started in this healthcare business by providing them a benefit that dealt with disease and trauma, and the world has become more complicated than that. And there are some aspects we used to not cover, and I like to call it, we used to think of these as defects, but they're diseases. And so we've really moved beyond that, which is there are protocols, there are treatments, there are things we can do, there are programs we can put in place, we can put in counseling. And just as we do a lot of preventative work around disease, we can do preventative work around mental health, addiction, obesity, high blood pressure, cancer, and all of those things. And I think it's really the responsibility of us as employers, and by the way, therefore we become huge payers, to do everything we can from a proactive standpoint to help our employees live well lives in a holistic way and deal, not just with like a flu shot, but we do financial planning for our employees because we found a high correlation between the stress of I can't pay my bills this month correlating to mental health, addiction, alcoholism, anxiety, high blood pressure. So I don't think we will ever do enough, but we are doing more than we ever can. We're trying to do this and to get ahead of the curve and be much more proactive than we've ever been.
Sonja, I'm not forgetting you. Tell me about why you were called an employee benefit news game changer. They named you a game changer in your company, Microsoft, for a program that you have called Microsoft Cares. Tell me about that program, and is it something that could be replicated?
Yeah, so Microsoft Cares is really just our EAP program and the moniker we put around it. But we do wrap a number of services within it that are maybe unique. So, we've had an EAP for more than 30 years, but just a few years ago, we started to sort of rethink how we're approaching the EAP and enhancing it, making it something that can help us solve the access issue within mental health care. So just this past month, in May Mental Health Month, we've done a couple of campaigns. We took our standard EAP that's been around for a while from 3 sessions per year to now we offer you up to 24 sessions per year. So that's free short-term counseling available to everyone. But we also took it global, which is a big challenge for us. It's hard to implement any sort of health or wellness or any benefits program outside of the US in a consistent fashion because different rules and regulations sort of drive what's locally relevant. But what we did was, sort of as a company, we believe that everyone needs access to this care. So we took our local contracts and were able to negotiate and bring out and offer 100% of our employees. We're in over 100 countries. We have 120,000 plus employees. Everyone now has access to free short-term counseling. And that was a pretty big deal for us, but also sort of speaks to our core values as a company as well.
Richard, it was mentioned this morning that construction workers have some of the highest rates of opioid substance abuse. I see this in my reporting all the time, that people who work really tough jobs, a lot of your members are struggling with dependency, and it affects the ability for employers to recruit in some parts of the country because people may not sign up for a job because they worry about mandated drug testing. What approaches have you seen that are working out there to deal with that specific issue?
Well, first of all, we believe it's going to take, we're going to have to radically transform the workplace culture as it is right now. We have high-stress people in high-stress jobs, whether they're on a construction site or in an office.
Yeah.
And managers and supervisors are going to need to be trained for the proper ways to address those mental health issues and without adding to the employee's stress or playing into stigmas or violating their rights. They have to acquire the communication skills for workers that are affecting productivity, an approach that goes beyond threatening negative consequences or discipline in the process. And then right now, workers must be empowered, quite frankly, to talk about that stress and be able to ask for an accommodation. And then employers must be willing to make reasonable changes to deadlines, to schedules, to work teams, to spaces, and those needs like that. There are 3 ways I think that we can work together with employers. 3 things that I think that we need to do quickly. Because while I agree with you, things are changing, they still have a long, long way to go. 78% of low-wage workers don't even have a single sick day. And that means if they have a substance use disorder or they have a mental illness, that they have to give up jobs, they have to give up a day's work to get counseling or treatment or anything like that. So we have a long way to go. The first thing we can do is work together to prevent the stress from creating these conditions. The second thing we can do is intervene quickly when someone has a problem and make sure they can get treatment, and then ensure that they get quality treatment and they have equal access to behavioral health as they do for any other mental or any other health issue.
And do you want to address the specific of substance abuse and how to help employers deal with that issue? Because it can be a resource issue.
We've trained our members, our staff people, and our leaders to be able to identify the early signals, the signs of mental substance use disorders or any other kind of order. And then we have a peer-to-peer program that we get them into training, and we have a peer-to-peer program that keeps them in the training. Because the biggest thing that happens is they go into treatment and they're out of treatment. So we use peer-to-peer.
Or relapse is very common in that.
Yeah. To keep them in the training and have someone there to help them, to give them strength, someone who's been there generally.
So it's a peer who's already lived the experience.
Exactly. Say, I was there, I know how you feel, and then talk them through them. And then we have employee assistance programs that help identify the program and get them into treatment before it becomes a job issue, before it starts to actually affect the employee so bad that their job is in jeopardy.
Roger, your company was recently awarded a contract to support research, I think, on the effects of deployments and career experiences on service members and their families as well. And I know you work with that population a lot. So first of all, why was it important to do that research, and what did you find?
Well, about 25% of our employees are veterans.
Wow.
And if you include the families and spouses of veterans, it's about a third of our employees. We do a lot of government work. We do a lot of work with the military. And we have been forward deployed military, whether we are at war or close to at war, but we have people in the AOR, even today, and this has been going on literally since 9/11. And the incidence of addiction, whether it be opioid, alcohol, other gateway drugs, is whole multiples higher among active military and veterans. So it was important to try to figure out why, what happens when you're in service, how do we deal with the transition from leaving the active military to going to civilian life. And what we have found, again, studies are still ongoing, is people who have especially been in a combat zone or the area of operational responsibility, the transition is very extreme. And the value system and the support system that they're used to when they're in the military, right, is just not there when they come back to civilian society. And they go to work for our company, and they don't have a platoon, they don't have a squad leader, they're not 24 hours in the military. I mean, we have them, for 8 to 10 hours a day. We can provide that support system when they're with us. When they go home, right, they have idle time, they miss their friends, they miss their buddies, They have a ton of idle time. They're trying to understand their new purpose in life. In the military, it's very clear why they're there. They have a strong sense of purpose, a strong sense of camaraderie, and when they transition to civilian life, that's gone, and there's a vacuum. And way too often, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines fill that vacuum with, it might be start out with alcohol, that becomes a gateway drug. Before you know it, the alcohol doesn't do what it once did, and they escalate. And we have found with access to prescription opioids, especially if you're in the military, you might have had an exoskeleton problem in theater, you might have had a bad shoulder, you might have had issues with knees, and so it's not uncommon for them to go get treatment for physical therapy, which might include a prescription for something like Oxycontin or Oxycodone or Tylenol 3, and it starts. And often they are more on their own in the civilian world than they were in the military, where there's a medic, there's someone who watches them, whose friends are with them 24 hours a day. Now they're more on their own. And without a lot of TLC, right, they can sort of fall out of the straight and narrow, and then they become addicted, and then they're in this cycle.
So what's
as
the
an employer,
solution? What
right,
do you do?
it's our role is very different than it is when they're in the military. There's all this preventative work we do. We do random drug testing and things, but it's really our first I think thing that we do is try to make everyone aware. And we know if they're in transition from active military to veteran status, we know they're at higher risk. There are some proactive things we can do. There's some, but we do the same thing. We have reimbursement for counseling. We have a great EAP program, but it's to make them aware that they are going through a transition, and therefore they have a propensity, right, to alcohol, to gateway drugs, to addiction, and then try to be much more proactive with them with those early months and years when they're transitioning out of active duty.
Nilka, there's a lot of talk where I live in New York about taxi drivers, and I realize this is they're not Lyft drivers, but there have been a number of suicides. It's been widely covered in the news in New York. I wonder why if you have any opinion on why that might be happening, and what could other agencies, what could other companies, drivers of all kinds, learn from a company like Lyft?
Yeah, I mean, those are tragic issues. What I'll say is that my focus is really internally and what we can do to make sure that we're creating the best possible experience for our drivers. So we have groups of people that provide that regular touch point and interface for our driver population. One of the things that's sort of very much part of our culture when you get to Lyft is you learn that everything that we do is in service of our drivers. So we've tried to build a very driver-centric culture. So what that means for people that are at the front lines, are dealing with these urgent and emergent issues day to day with drivers and with passengers. There's safety issues, there's pay issues. We want to make sure that there's a real sensitivity around what's happening out there in the streets, essentially. So how do we create a workforce that's attuned to those needs, that in every interaction can operate with empathy and care? One of the things that we do, our primary customer experience team that provide that frontline support through the phones is in Nashville. We actually bring twice a week on-site therapists there because we know that they're dealing with some really difficult issues. And so I think about this as a virtuous circle, right? If we have a really healthy, maintained workforce that we've really supported and propped up and day to day are giving them the support that they need, they're going to deliver that to the drivers and to the passengers in those regular exchanges and interactions. So I think it starts at home, and then we extend that to our drivers and our customers.
Sonja, this panel is titled The Whole Person Approach. So let's talk about that. What positive changes have you seen that really address supporting employees in a holistic, whole person kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been our focus. We changed our company's mission a few years back when we had a leadership change to empowering every person on the planet to achieve more. And so within HR, we think of that as we need to empower the people who empower the planet to have an opportunity for a life well lived. And that requires us to take a holistic approach. And so one thing we've really done a lot of in the last couple years is starting to have the conversation. So during May Mental Health Month last year, we started a campaign called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And it was more of a grassroots effort from the benefits team to start the conversation and get the ball moving, make sure people are aware of the resources we have. We not only do we have traditional EAP through regular in-person sessions, but you can also do video counseling. We have text-based therapy, and now we're also gonna have on-site therapy. So starting the conversation, making sure people know about it. But what came out of it that was profound and something we weren't able to anticipate was the number of leaders, both within HR and outside of HR, at the most senior levels, as well as sort of on the ground, first line managers, who started to step up and sort of own the conversation. They started telling their own story. They started making it a culture of acceptance by just sharing and being open about it. Not something we could have gone out and sought and implemented on our own. But once it started, we really leaned into their message, talked to them, and got them to amplify their voice and had them share more broadly where they were comfortable. And we ran the same campaign again this past May, and we've had just a tenfold increase in the number of leaders who have started it. And we do it globally as well. So we have, in some countries where this is even more taboo, they've really stepped up and started to own the conversation. And it's been very profound, I think, in just the shift in how people are willing to talk about it, and that then enables more people to access it. In the first week of this year's campaign, we had more people access our EAP resources than we had in the entire month last year. So it was just a huge shift in the number of people who were starting to get access to care, which is a good start. Clearly more to come.
Richard, let me go back to you. We're in a, Mr. Trumka. I feel like I should call you Mr. Trumka all the time.
Call me Rich.
Okay, Rich. We're in a room full of industry leaders and people who work in corporate America. What advice would you offer to those employers about how to make things better? I mean, everybody up here has acknowledged that it's not exactly where we want it to be.
Well, first I'd like to get back and just redefine the magnitude of the problem, so everybody understands what we're dealing with. In any given year, roughly 43.6 million people will have a mental illness, and roughly 21.5 million people will have a substance use disorder. Those are the figures of the Kennedy Forum. Of those people, greater than 50% of the people with mental illnesses do not receive proper medical treatment, and greater than 90% of the people with substance use disorders don't receive treatment of any kind. Veterans, we lose approximately 20 to 22 veterans every single day. So we've started a program called Helmets to Hard Hats. We recruit people coming out of the military. We bring them into our apprenticeship program. We start them on day one with peer-to-peer, with awareness. I think what we can do, first, we have to understand that in order to correct the problem, we have to understand the problem. Two, that it's going to take a cultural change in the workplace. It's going to take some give and take by employers and employees. Unions, workers, everybody is going to have to give a little bit to make it work because it's so massive and it's so different in every single place. And then start the training on the three things that I talked about earlier. Training that can identify an impending problem. Two, you come up with a way to provide care for that program. Us working together to do all of those things.
Do you see?
And three, it's gonna take, the awareness is gonna take understanding that some of the things that we do and we take as gospel, scheduling, deadlines, some of those things, we're gonna have to have some flexibility with those things to de-stress the workplace so that people can actually avoid the problem rather than us trying to fix the problem. And then the last thing I'd love for them to realize is when we partner and do this, it's actually win-win. They're gonna get a more productive workplace, they're gonna make more profit, and their employees are gonna be a whole lot better off.
Do you all see the culture changing? I mean, I feel like there's stigma, but there's less, and that people are the old school ways from 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, where you just wouldn't even talk at the job about. You'd be embarrassed to talk about a mental health issue, or you'd feel like your boss would fire you, or put you on a lesser assignment, right? That was the reality back then. Do you all feel like that I mean, I look at the Lyft. I mean, I think you guys are at the forefront, but do you feel globally like that is changing?
Yeah, I feel like we are in a paradigm shift. This conversation is a conversation because things are shifting. Just last year, our co-founder at Lyft, John Zimmer, he actually went on the record and was very public about his own depression and his own dark moments that he went through during particularly tough times against our competitor, who I won't name. And and that was just a wonderful example of a leader leading by example, really humanizing this and making his own issues up for grabs in terms of conversation, and the signal that sent to others is actually really profound. So I think when leaders that are perceived to be infallible and unflappable at the top of their game, if they can say, I struggle with this too, how much easier does that make it for all of us? And the stats that Richard just rattled off in terms of the magnitude of the problem really suggests that this is all of our problem, right? Like, this is happening extremely close to home. It's happening with us individually. It's happening to people in our families, and people that we're sitting next to day to day. So the fact that we can't talk about it is actually pretty ridiculous, given how close and proximate it is to every single one of us. So I think that there is a shift that's happening, and we just need to continue to lean into that.
Does anyone else want to take that question?
I was just going to repeat, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but it was in one of the breakout sessions earlier today, and somebody said the tide is shifting, the change is happening in the workforce, but the ecosystem to support it, like with the mental health professionals, hasn't caught up yet. Like, there aren't enough people to help provide the support. The insurance companies aren't reimbursing them at a high enough rate to get more and more people into the network. So I think the conversation has shifted, and I think that millennials are demanding it, and I think, which is great, and I think the leaders are stepping up, but I think there's still a lot of work to do to make sure people get access without getting the bills where they're paying all of it because they're out of network.
Yeah, I would say it is better, but industry by industry, it's complex. So about a third of our employees hold what we call a security clearance. So that means that they have had a background check and that they've been deemed to be able to access, classified
like government jobs.
Government information. And if you go to counseling, that's what we call a reportable item. So you would actually have to tell your security, your granting agency, that you have been to counseling.
And does it count against you?
It depends, but it does create, again, for some jobs, we do work with the Department of Energy. They're a little sensitive to that as well. And if you feel depressed, let's say you were a veteran, you were in theater, you come back, you have a job, you've been working for 6 months, by the way, you're trying to kind of get reintroduced to your family and your kids, and you've been away on deployment, you've got bills to pay, and you feel a little depressed, maybe just a little. You therefore are more likely to go, well, I'll just kind of buck it out. I'll kind of get through this.
It's a disincentive to coming forward and getting treatment.
Right. And it's sort of like, oh, now if I go to counseling, that might be reportable. And it's not just in Department of Defense work. Again, it's Department of Energy. There are some fairly high-risk, dangerous jobs that are outside of the defense work where you have to certify, you have to take a drug test. And again, if you report that you've been in counseling, it complicates your employability. And so for those particular, we used to call them military operational specialties, but for those trades, it is complex. And so the first thing someone might do is say, well, maybe I'll self-treat, right? I'll try to figure this out on my own, right? And then they get into a cycle and we don't get them, so it's has a little bit of that stigma. We don't get them into treatment early enough, and by the time we recognize the problem, then it's a more severe problem.
I appreciate the honesty about that, Rich.
You know, and then there's another problem after that, because it still is stigmatized. And if you go on in a coal mine or a factory or a construction site, and someone finds out that you're doing counseling, you're going to get ridiculed for a while. They're going to, first it's good natured, but then they bump you, but then it dissuades people, one, from getting help, and two, from staying with the help afterwards. So it's up to all of us, and we're trying this in all of our classes to try to teach the importance of it and to be open about it and to be able to talk about it and not stigmatize people because they have it. If you have cancer, no one stigmatizes you.
Right.
This is no different than any other medical condition that you may have, and we struggle with it because a lot of our people are just, well, you're inferior, you're weak, you shouldn't be doing
Right,
that.
seen
It's
as a
funny.
weakness.
And so it's a strong educational program, and I would love to be able to sit here and look at you and say, we've conquered it, but we haven't. We're still fighting that every day.
Why are you all sitting here? Why did you all say, oh yeah, I'll come be on a panel? I'm curious what your motivation is. Rich, I'll start with you.
To do exactly what I just said, to talk about it, to start bringing it out so that this can be an accepted method, just like any other illness or condition you may have. These two conditions are exactly that way. I want to be able to talk about it. I want to be able to tell people that it is important for us to recognize the signs, to treat the signs, and not stigmatize the sign, but applaud somebody who actually has the courage to come forward and say, I have a problem, I need it. I don't understand this, but I need help. And so I'm here to do exactly that.
Nilka?
I would just say it's personal. I went through my own set of circumstances. For 5 years, I suffered from infertility issues. I lost babies. I went through really trying treatments. I was isolated and felt alone, and had my own sense of shame around my inability to have a baby, right? And so, 5 years is a long time to hold a lot of that information inside of you. And it wasn't until I was really willing to share my experiences with other people and open up and expose something that was so meaningful and real in my life that I actually was able to sort of get beyond that. And what I found through that conversation and that vulnerability is that there's so many people that were sitting right next to me that were going through the exact same thing, that were suffering in silence and showing up for work every day just with your mask on. And I can't underestimate how much time I wasted and how much suffering that I unnecessarily went through, and it's really important. And I think that we all have to do our part, right? And even if it's just rubbing someone's back and being there to support them during a tough moment, it means something. So if we can create workplaces where that's normal and that's natural and that's expected, then that's the type of company that I want to be a part of and work for.
Sonja?
Yeah, I would say a lot of similar thoughts as Richard too, that part of my motivation is to tell the story of some of the work we've done so that it's more commonplace for people to be talking about the stories, to hear, to really encourage other employers to invest their time and their resources into this space, because it is impactful. I think tech has done a great job of sort of, I guess, within benefits in general, we're constantly competing for talent, and this is a way that we can do that. But it's also about the person and trying to, sort of encourage others to also be thinking about how they can help support their employers and drive the conversation in their workplaces.
Yeah, I would just say I think we have a responsibility. People spend more time at work than they do at home. They spend more time with their coworkers than they do with their family. I don't think corporate America would say, well, we just rent you when you come to work. We really care about the whole person. And also mention, Kate, every time I do one of these, I'm sure it's true for everyone else, the emails I get, the letters, the employees that come up to me, we are trying to break that stigma and break that cycle. And the more we talk about it, the more people will talk to us about it. And the more people will identify problems, they will go to counseling, they will give us suggestions on ways that we can help. How do we spend our benefit dollars? Can we do that in a more efficient way? Can we provide better care to our employees that actually address some of the root causes and make a difference?
Well, I'm going to be talking more about my personal story at the night event tonight, so I won't answer my own question, but I'm here for a reason too. I think we're all here, and as somebody said, everyone in this room is touched by these issues. I mean, even if it's not your own personal struggle, it's something in your family or your friend group. I want to thank you for being here, for taking the time out. I really do appreciate that. And I'm going to say goodbye to three of you. Roger, with the boot on, I think you can just sit here for a moment.
Thanks.
But thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Rich, thank you.